The warning did not come with explosions. It did not arrive with fanfare, nor did it announce itself with blinding weapons fire or the shadow of a fleet meant to intimidate. It came quietly, almost imperceptibly, slipping across the void of space, and every known frequency, repeated patiently, translated flawlessly into thousands of languages. Every dialect, every cognitive framework. This is Earth. That alone was enough to spark amusement in distant halls of power. Earth, a minor world orbiting an unremarkable star, catalogued decades earlier, barely remembered. A species still struggling to govern itself, still divided by culture, by language, by centuries of conflict, still learning how to leave its cradle without destroying itself in the process. And yet the message continued. This transmission is a formal warning. Any further hostile action against our world or our people will be interpreted as an existential threat. The response will be absolute, calm, measured, polite. That was the first mistake. Among the high assemblies, warnings were expected to tremble with fear. They were meant to beg, to posture, to exaggerate, to convince. Civilizations issued warnings when they were afraid, when they had something to lose, when their power was limited and fragile. The tone of Earth's message did not match its content, and so it was dismissed. Earth was simply a child shouting at a storm it could not hope to weather. In the halls of the Keth Dominion, laughter rippled through the chamber. The Keth had conquered 12 systems without firing a single shot. Their reputation alone was enough to bend worlds to their will, to them. Earth's warning sounded almost charming. Elsewhere, in the Veiler Combine, the transmission was archived. Without comment, the Veiler did not laugh. They calculated, and their calculations were precise. Earth had no fleet capable of interstellar combat, no allies of consequence, no strategic position worth noting. The warning was logged, then ignored. The galaxy had seen this pattern before. Young civilizations, newly aware of the cosmos, attempting to draw lines they could not enforce, promising consequences they could never deliver. The galaxy had learned long ago that such warnings were meaningless. Earth, it seemed, would be no different. What no model accounted for was that Earth's warning was not fear. It was fact. On Earth, there were no speeches, no mass mobilizations, no visible panic. The skies remained clear, cities slept and woke as they always had, trade routes flowed. Communications ran normally. To the average human, the galaxy might as well not have existed, yet beneath the calm surface, systems long dormant stirred to life. Power reserves rerouted silently. Orbital platforms shifted by fractions of a degree, invisible to all but the most precise sensors. Networks separated by design sensed again, not hurriedly, but with the confidence of mechanisms tested over decades in simulations no outsider could know. Humanity did not prepare in haste. It prepared in silence for decades. Earth had watched the galaxy as a survivor watches a storm, not with panic, but with planning. Every probe sent beyond the system carried more sensors than engines. Every first contact scenario had been studied not for success, but for failure. Humanity's history had taught a brutal lesson. Threats are rarely announced honestly, and survival favors those who prepare long before danger arrives. When the galaxy ignored the warning, Earth did not repeat it. Warnings were not for debate. They were to be remembered. The first act of hostility came not as a declaration of war, but as an incident. A mining consortium under Keth Charter dispatched automated extractors into the Sol system, claiming a navigational error. The machines began dismantling asteroids, siphoning resources, transmitting mapping data to the galaxy. This was routine, a test, a measure of how serious Earth was. To Earth, it was confirmation. The extractors ceased mid-cycle, no explosion, no energy spike, no debris. They simply stopped, power drained, systems locked, their internal logs later revealed something impossible, rewritten in under a second. The Keth dismissed it as malfunction and sent manned vessels. That was when Earth spoke again. The second transmission mirrored the first. Same calm tone, same precise phrasing. "This is Earth. This is your final warning. This time, fewer left." Somewhere between the stars, commanders felt unease. They could not quantify. Something about consistency. Something about restraint. Civilizations that feared destruction shouted louder. When ignored, Earth did not. It waited. In that waiting, the galaxy unknowingly crossed the line between misunderstanding and consequence. After Earth's second warning echoed across known space, the galaxy did not recoil in fear, but leaned forward in calculated curiosity. The message was to calm, to deliberate, and to free of desperation to fit the familiar pattern of threatened worlds. Civilizations on the brink of annihilation begged, bluffed, or raged. Earth had done none of those things. It had spoken plainly, issued a boundary, and then fallen silent. That silence unsettled strategists more than any shouted threat because it suggested confidence rather than hope, preparation rather than panic. Among the many powers watching closely, the Keth Dominion was the first to act, not with invasion, but with a test. They authorized a limited incursion, a maneuver designed to probe Earth's resolve without committing meaningful assets. 3 cruisers were dispatched toward the Sol system. Under strict orders, cross the declared boundary. Do not fire. Observe the response. It was a tactic as old as Empire itself, a way to expose bluffs while minimizing risk. If Earth reacted with chaos or hesitation, its warning would be dismissed. If it did nothing, the galaxy would know the line was meaningless. The cruisers entered Sol space unchallenged. No alarm sounded. No defensive fleets appeared. Earth satellites continued their steady orbits, broadcasting nothing unusual. As the ships advanced, confidence crept into the command decks. Some officers relaxed, assuming the silence confirmed their expectations. But others watched their instruments more closely and felt unease grow. Sensor readings were consistent to an unnatural degree. Background radiation patterns showed subtle regularities, and long-range scans hinted at layers of observation, far beyond what Earth's known technology should allow. Still, nothing interfered. With their advance, the first cruiser failed without warning. There was no explosion, no energy surge, no detectable weapon discharge. One moment its engines burned normally. The next they went dark, leaving the vessel drifting, powerless and silent. Before the crew of the remaining ships could react, the second cruiser suffered the same fate, its systems cascading offline as if something unseen had reached inside its structure and calmly switched it off. Panic spread instantly. Shields flared. Weapons charged. Emergency signals flooded the void. And the third cruiser attempted an immediate retreat, engine straining as it turned back toward open space. It never made it out. The ship vanished completely from all sensors, not shattered, not displaced, simply erased. One instant it existed, the next it did not, leaving behind only empty coordinates where mass and matter had once been. The crews of the disabled cruisers could do nothing but watch, powerless and intact, as reality itself seemed to close around their missing companion. No known weapon behaved this way. No known physics explained it. Reports reached the Keth Dominion stripped of speculation and heavy with raw data that refused to fit established models. There were no energy signatures, no spatial distortions, no traceable emissions. Other powers gained access to the information soon after, and disbelief spread quickly. Military analysts ran simulations and found their projections collapsing under new unknowns. Earth had not responded with violence in the conventional sense. It had responded with control so absolute that resistance had never even been possible. The third transmission followed shortly thereafter, its timing as deliberate as its wording. The human voice was unchanged, steady, and neutral, as it stated that the action taken had been measured and that no lives had been lost. It clarified that this was restraint, not retaliation, and that the boundary previously declared remained closed. The pause that followed was long enough to settle into every listening chamber before the final words arrived, warning that further violations would not be met with the same limitation. Across the galaxy, doubt spread faster than fear. Councils postponed decisions. Fleets already mobilizing slowed their advance. Some leaders argued that Earth must have exhausted its advantage, that such power could not be limitless, while others insisted that no single world could withstand coordinated assault. Yet beneath the debate ran a growing, uncomfortable realization. Earth had not displayed its strength to intimidate. It had demonstrated it only to end a test. And then it had stopped. On Earth itself, there were no celebrations and no declarations of victory. Systems updated probabilities. Strategic layers shifted quietly into place. Humanity treated the encounter not as a triumph, but as confirmation. The galaxy had tested the warning, and the response had been delivered with precision and restraint. Still, Earth understood something the others did not. This had not been the final challenge. It had only been the moment when misunderstanding hardened into resolve, setting the stage for a confrontation that would decide whether the galaxy would listen to its last warning or force humanity to ensure it never needed to be repeated. The galaxy did not respond with unity. It fractured along familiar lines of fear, ambition, and disbelief. Some powers withdrew fleets and sealed borders, choosing caution over pride, while others interpreted Earth's restraint as a temporary anomaly rather than a permanent condition. The absence of follow-up threats became its own provocation. Humanity had spoken, acted once, and then returned to silence, a silence that pressed on every strategic mind like gravity, forcing them to imagine what was being prepared beyond there. Sensors dialed within the high conclave of the Varel ascendancy. The debate grew heated and volatile. The Varel had ruled through calculated dominance for centuries, expanding not through reckless conquest, but through overwhelming deterrence. To them, Earth represented a dangerous contradiction, a young species, technologically underestimated, now wielding a form of control that bypassed traditional measures of power. Some counselors argued for immediate coalition strikes before Earth's methods could be understood or replicated. Others warned that provoking a civilization capable of erasing ships without detectable force risked escalation beyond recovery. The word unknown appeared often in their projections, and that alone stalled consensus. Humanity, meanwhile, did not wait. Across Earth's orbital infrastructure and hidden installations, long-planned protocols activated with methodical precision. Not war mobilization, but resilience expansion. Communication relays hardened against interference. Civilian evacuation routes were quietly rehearsed. Energy networks shifted to distributed configurations designed to function even if entire regions were severed. To the outside observer, Earth remained still. But beneath the calm surface, the species moved with practiced coordination, not as a hive, but as a system refined by centuries of internal conflict and hard-earned survival. It was during this phase that the galaxy began to notice something unsettling. Earth did not posture. There were no visible armadas assembling near its borders, no massive displays of weaponry meant to intimidate. Instead, long-range sensors detected subtle changes in the structure of local space itself, faint alterations that defied classification. These anomalies did not radiate outward aggressively. They settled, layered, and stabilized, as if Earth were reinforcing reality rather than attacking through it. Analysts struggled to name what they were seeing, because their languages had no word for fortification on a cosmological scale. A second test followed, this time not from a single empire, but from a joint reconnaissance effort. Disguised as diplomatic inquiry, automated probes, uncrewed and legally ambiguous, were sent drifting toward the sole boundary from multiple vectors. They carried no weapons and broadcast benign signatures, designed to exploit any loophole in Earth-stated conditions. One by one, they crossed the line. None returned data. None vanished. Instead, Each probe stopped exactly at the boundary and remained there, motionless, intact, and permanently silent, forming a visible ring of frozen machines that marked Earth's declared limit. With eerie precision, the message this sent was impossible to ignore. Earth was not merely reacting. It was defining space on its own terms. The boundary was not a line enforced by patrols or firepower, but a condition imposed on existence itself. To cross it was not to invite attack, but to surrender agency. For civilizations accustomed to negotiating power through force, the implication was deeply disturbing. How do you threaten something that does not need to threaten you back? Whispers began to circulate in academic and intelligence circles, theories that humanity had discovered something fundamental, not a weapon, but a principle, a way to leverage the rules of the universe rather than fight within them. Others dismissed this as exaggeration, insisting that no species could ascend so quickly without catastrophic instability. Yet even those skeptics could not deny the data accumulating across sectors. Earth's silence was not empty. It was structured, deliberate, and expanding. On Earth, the architects of the warning watched the probes with grim focus. This phase had been anticipated. Humanity had known the galaxy would test boundaries, not with courage, but with caution and technicalities. The systems holding the line were not infinite, but they were sufficient, and more importantly, they were controlled. Every intrusion mapped reactions, every attempt refined understanding. Earth was not merely defending itself, it was learning how the galaxy thought. As days stretched into weeks without escalation, something unprecedented began to occur. Fear did not spike, it stabilized. Trade routes adjusted. Military alerts remained active but static. The galaxy entered a holding pattern, suspended between action and restraint, waiting for someone else to move first. And in that waiting, the true pressure began to build. Because uncertainty is more corrosive than open conflict, humanity understood this well. It had lived with it for most of its history. The question no longer whispered, but spoken openly in council chambers was no longer whether Earth could be attacked, but whether it should be. And beneath the question lay another, more dangerous one. If Earth was forced to act again, would it choose restraint a second time? Or would the galaxy learn why the warning had been called final? The moment the galaxy moved, it did so quietly, not with banners or declarations, but with the cold efficiency of consensus reached behind sealed chambers. A coalition formed without ceremony, stitched together by fear disguised as prudence. They called it a containment initiative, a precautionary stabilization effort, words chosen carefully to mask the truth that this was the first coordinated attempt to challenge Earth's warning without openly defying it. Fleets were positioned just beyond the sole boundary, not in aggressive formations, but close enough to be felt. Close enough to test whether Earth's silence was resolve or hesitation. From Earth's perspective, the change was immediate and unmistakable. Sensors registered mass accumulation, gravitational wakes overlapping like shadows, hundreds of vessels holding station in perfect alignment. This was not reconnaissance. This was pressure. The cadence of human response shifted, not to panic, but to readiness refined by long memory. Generations of brinkmanship, Cold Wars, and near extinctions had taught humanity one crucial lesson: escalation rarely begins with violence. It begins with proximity. A single transmission arrived, encoded through neutral channels, broadcast in dozens of languages simultaneously. It spoke of mutual safety, of shared responsibility, of the need to verify capabilities for the good of all civilizations. The words were smooth, rehearsed, almost gentle, but beneath them lay an assumption. So old it went unquestioned. That power must be inspected, that dominance must be measured. That Earth, having acted once, owed explanation to those who feared it. The response from Earth came after a pause long enough to feel deliberate. It was brief. No justification, no apology, no expansion of terms. The message repeated only one clause from the original warning, delivered now with colder cadence and absolute clarity. The boundary remains. Any force verification constitutes an attack. The consequences remain unchanged. There was no anger in the transmission. That absence was more unsettling than rage could have been. Within hours, the coalition made its decision, not to cross the boundary with weapons, but to cross it with presence. Manned ships advanced slowly, shields active, but power levels restrained. Crews instructed to hold fire under all circumstances. This was calculated defiance, designed to provoke response while maintaining plausible innocence. If Earth reacted, it could be framed as disproportionate. If it did not, the warning would be proven hollow. To the strategists who approved the maneuver, it seemed flawless. The instant the first vessel breached the boundary, reality tightened. There was no explosion, no flash of light, no violent distortion. The ship simply slowed, systems responding, as if submerged in invisible resistance. Crew voices spiked with confusion as instruments contradicted one another. Momentum ceased. External readings flattened. The vessel did not lose power. It lost permission. One by one, additional ships crossed, and one by one, they joined the growing formation of immobilized steel. A silent monument to miscalculation forming in space. Panic followed, not in screams, but in protocol failures. Orders overlapped. Retreat. Commands conflicted with inertia. Engineers rerouted power, boosted thrusters, cut non-essential systems, but nothing restored motion. The boundary was not a field to be pushed through. It was a condition that had already been accepted the moment the line was crossed. Outside the sole perimeter, the remaining fleet halted, watching helplessly as their forward elements became statues. Earth did not fire. Earth did not advance. It did not even repeat the warning. Instead, a new signal propagated outward, not targeted at the immobilized ships, but broadcast across known space. It carried sensor data, visual confirmation, and a simple statement delivered without cadence shift or emotional weight. This is restraint. This is the last demonstration. The next crossing will not stop. For the first time, the coalition commanders understood the depth of their error. They had assumed escalation would be symmetrical, that every response existed on a familiar scale of force and counterforce. What they faced instead was asymmetry so complete it erased the rules they depended. Earth had not built a bigger weapon. It had changed the terms of engagement so thoroughly that traditional aggression no longer applied. Across the galaxy, reactions were immediate and visceral. Governments scrambled to distance themselves from the coalition. Neutral systems issued emergency declarations recognizing sole sovereignty. Military academies suspended exercises to study what had just occurred. Though none could yet explain it, fear surged. But it was no longer the fear of attack. It was the fear of irrelevance. If Earth could decide who moved and who did not, then power itself had shifted. On Earth, the architects did not celebrate. They watched the immobilized ships in silence, knowing this moment would be misread by some as weakness and by others as mercy. Both interpretations were dangerous. Humanity had demonstrated restraint twice now. History suggested that restraint, when misunderstood, invites a final, catastrophic test. And somewhere beyond the edge of map space, forces far older and less patient than the coalition were already paying attention. Drawn not by Earth's warning, but by the audacity of a species that had dared to redefine consequence itself. The waiting did not last long, because fear, when left unanswered, always seeks proof. In distant regions of the galaxy where Earth's broadcasts arrived late and filtered through rumor, the story twisted. What some heard as restraint, others translated as bluff. Ancient powers, older than the coalitions and untouched by their politics, began to speak among themselves, not with outrage, but with curiosity sharpened by pride. They had ruled starways before Earth had shaped its first tools, and they refused to accept that a young species could dictate the movement of fleets without paying a visible price. The first strike did not come from the immobilized ships or the embarrassed coalition. It came from beyond known lanes, from vessels that did not signal, did not broadcast, and did not posture. They emerged at the fringe of Sol space with weapons already charged, their intent clear in the efficiency of their formation. There was no warning, no attempted negotiation. Only the sudden surge of energy as long-range projectiles accelerated toward Earth's outer defenses. In that instant, the galaxy crossed a line it would never uncross. Earth responded immediately. No debate, no delay, no second message. Defensive systems that had remained dormant now awakened in perfect synchrony, layers unfolding like a living structure. The cadence of the moment shifted sharply, fast, precise, final. Incoming fire vanished mid-transit, erased not by interception, but by absence. As if the space it traveled through had briefly ceased to exist, the attacking vessels did not. Slow. They disintegrated, hulls fractured, power cores collapsed. Entire ships unraveled into expanding clouds of light and debris in the span of heartbeats. The shock was instantaneous and absolute. Observers across the galaxy watched real-time feeds as formations that had once inspired terror simply ceased to be. There was no prolonged battle, no exchange of salvos, no escalation ladder to climb. The attack had triggered exactly what Earth had promised, and the result was not domination, but erasure. This was not warfare as the galaxy understood it. It was enforcement. Within seconds, the boundary changed. What had once immobilized now annihilated. Any object crossing at velocity experienced catastrophic failure at the molecular level. Cohesion lost as the fundamental forces binding matter together were disrupted. Ships did not explode. They fell apart. Crew compartments collapsed into nothing. Technology older than human civilization was reduced to drifting atoms. The difference was unmistakable, and it carried a message no translation software could. Soften. Earth transmitted again, but only once. The voice was the same as before, calm and steady. But the cadence had hardened, stripped of explanation and patience. You were warned. This action confirms intent. There will be no further demonstrations. The boundary is now permanent. Any future violation will result in immediate destruction. This is not a threat. This is the new condition of existence around Sol. Across command centers light years away. Silence fell. Not the tense silence of uncertainty, but the heavy silence of comprehension. The galaxy understood now that Earth had not escalated. It had concluded. The earlier restraint had not been hesitation, but choice. The difference mattered, and the cost of misunderstanding it had just been paid in full. On Earth, no celebrations erupted, no triumph was declared. The cities remained quiet, the skies unchanged. Humanity watched the aftermath with the same discipline. It had shown from the beginning, aware that this moment would define them for centuries. They had crossed the final threshold, not because they wanted to, but because the galaxy had forced their hand. Survival, once again, had demanded clarity over compassion. Far beyond Sol, the ancient powers retreated, not in disorder, but in reverent caution. They carried with them recordings of the boundaries, effect, fragments of data that defied existing physics, and a single undeniable conclusion. Humanity had not merely defended its home, it had established a law of space, enforced not by conquest, but by consequence. And as the debris of the destroyed fleets continued to drift, where an invasion had once formed, the galaxy faced a truth it could no longer ignore. Earth's final warning had not been a declaration of war. It had been the closing of an era, the end of assumption, and the beginning of a universe where humanity no longer asked to be understood. In the aftermath, the galaxy did not erupt into chaos as many had feared. It slowed. Trade lanes emptied. Military exercises were quietly canceled. Diplomatic channels that once buzzed with posturing now moved with cautious deliberation. The destruction near Sol had not ignited rage. It had induced reflection. the kind that follows an event so decisive it leaves no room for denial. For the first time in recorded interstellar history, power had been displayed without spectacle and enforced without conquest, and no civilization knew how to respond to that, except by stepping carefully. From Earth, the boundary remained unchanged, invisible yet absolute, a line written into space-time itself. Human sensors continued to observe, record, and predict, but no fleets were dispatched beyond it, no threats issued into the void. This restraint, now paired with proven consequence, reshaped perception more deeply than force ever could. Humanity was no longer seen as aggressive or defensive. It was seen as deliberate. That distinction mattered because deliberate actors could not be provoked into mistakes, and the galaxy had learned that lesson the hard way within Earth's councils. Debate gave way to quiet consensus. The warning had been delivered. The demonstration had been completed. What remained was stewardship. Humanity understood that survival had elevated them into a role no one had prepared them for, that of a stabilizing presence in a fractured galaxy. Not rulers, not conquerors, custodians of a line that, if crossed again, would demand destruction whether they wished it or not. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily, because humans knew better than most how dangerous absolute power could become when divorced from conscience. Beyond human space, the reaction fragmented. Younger civilizations rushed to formalize treaties, declaring recognition of soul's autonomy and committing to non-aggression doctrines, modeled after Earth's principles. Older empires retreated into silence, their leaders struggling to reconcile millennia of dominance with the sudden reality of limitation. Military theorists dismantled entire doctrines overnight, realizing that traditional escalation models were obsolete in a universe where one species could end a conflict before it began. Among the immobilized ships still held at the boundary, time stretched painfully. Crews were allowed to survive. Systems maintained at minimal life support levels by forces they could neither see nor resist. This was not imprisonment for interrogation or leverage. It was preservation, a living reminder of the choice Earth had made earlier and the line that had since hardened. Those crews became unwilling scholars of humanity's restraint, bearing witness to a power that did not need cruelty to make its point. Earth's final act in this phase came without announcement. One by one, the immobilized vessels were released. Momentum restored gently. Systems returned to function. No escort followed them. No conditions were issued beyond the boundary. They already understood. They were free to leave, and they did, carrying with them not propaganda, but experience. That release echoed across the galaxy more loudly than any broadcast could have. It proved the destruction had not been Earth's goal. Finality had been. The cadence of galactic discourse shifted permanently. Discussions once framed around dominance and deterrence now revolved around coexistence and limits of humanities. Warning had rewritten the unspoken rules that governed expansion. And though resentment lingered in some corners, fear had been replaced by respect in most. The galaxy had not been conquered. It had been educated. And in the quiet that followed, as Earth continued its orbit around an unremarkable star, a realization took hold among those watching. Humanity had not risen to power by accident or aggression. It had arrived there through endurance, adaptation, and a hard-earned understanding of consequence. The universe had tested them, as it always does, and humanity had answered not with annihilation, but with clarity that could not be ignored. The story was not over yet. Understanding, once achieved, does not guarantee wisdom. The galaxy had been warned, shown, and spared, but history suggested that somewhere, eventually, someone would test the boundary again. When the day came, the universe would remember this moment, and whether it would learn from it or repeat its mistakes remained the final unanswered question. Time passed, measured not in cycles or calendars, but in absence, the absence of war, the absence of incursions, the absence of the constant, grinding fear that had once defined interstellar existence for the first time since recorded history began. The galaxy experienced a sustained period where borders held not because they were defended by fleets, but because they were respected. Earth's boundary did not expand. It did not shift. It remained exactly where it had been declared, silent and unyielding, a reminder that restraint, once proven, could become its own form of stability. Humanity used the time not to posture, but to reflect. Records were open. Decisions were archived with brutal honesty, not to glorify what had been done, but to ensure it would never be misunderstood by future generations. Humans understood that the most dangerous moment for any powerful civilization is not when it is challenged, but when it grows comfortable with its own authority. Safeguards were written into governance, redundancies layered into command structures, and ethical constraints woven into the very systems that maintain the boundary. Power, they believed, must be harder to use than to possess. Across the galaxy, observers took note. Scholars, diplomats, and even military analysts began to visit the edges of soul space, stopping well short of the boundary, content to study from afar. What they found unsettled them more than weapon demonstrations ever had. There were no armadas waiting in ambush, no vast militarization of the inner system. Earth remained visibly inhabited, alive with commerce, culture, and contradiction. Humanity had not transformed into a fortress civilization. It had simply continued being human, imperfect, creative, and deeply aware of its own flaws. This, more than anything, reshaped perception. The galaxy had expected dominance to breed expansion, control to invite enforcement. But Earth did neither. Its power existed as a condition, not an ambition. The boundary was not a tool for influence, but a line drawn to protect the fragile possibility of coexistence. That choice resonated deeply with species who had known only cycles of conquest and reprisal. It suggested a future where strength did not automatically demand obedience. Among the civilizations that had once supported the coalition, quiet admissions began to surface. Mistakes were acknowledged, assumptions re-examined. The idea that humanity's warning had been an overreaction gave way to the uncomfortable truth that it had been proportionate to a threat others refused to see in themselves. Earth had not overreached. It had anticipated what unchecked fear would eventually justify. And yet, beneath the surface calm, humanity remained vigilant. Sensors never slept. Analysis continued. The boundary systems evolved, not toward greater lethality, but toward greater precision. Humans understood that the true test of their power was not whether they could destroy, but whether they could continue choosing not to. That discipline required constant effort, because the temptation to simplify problems through force never truly disappears. In distant systems, new generations grew up with Earth's warning as historical fact rather than fresh trauma. To them, soul was not a threat, but a reference point, an example cited in academies and council chambers alike, a civilization that had reached the edge of absolute capability and chosen limitation over domination. That story, repeated often enough, began to change the way power itself was defined. And still, somewhere in the vastness between stars, curiosity stirred again, not hostility, not ambition, curiosity, a desire to understand the mechanisms behind the boundary, the minds that had conceived it, the culture that could wield such force and then deliberately sheath it. Humanity felt that shift long before it manifested in movement. The galaxy was no longer testing Earth's strength. It was testing its wisdom. The question that now hovered, unspoken, but unavoidable, was no longer whether Earth could enforce its final warning. That answer had been settled decisively. The question was whether humanity could remain what it had proven itself to be in that moment of crisis. A species capable of choosing restraint when destruction would have been easier. The approach did not resemble the threats of the past, and that was what made it dangerous. No fleets massed at the edge of Sol, No weapon signatures flared into readiness. Instead, a single vessel emerged from deep space, ancient in design, yet meticulously maintained. Its hull marked not by symbols of conquest, but by the layered insignia of scholarship and observation. It slowed well before the boundary, engines dimming in a gesture that was unmistakably intentional. This was not an incursion. It was an inquiry. Earth detected it instantly. Sensors mapped every emission, every harmonic in its drive, every fluctuation. In its power core, the cadence within human command centers remained steady, disciplined, alert but unprovoked. This was the scenario they had anticipated in quiet planning sessions. The moment when restraint would be tested not by aggression, but by intent that fell into the gray space between fear and understanding. The vessel transmitted openly, its message translated without distortion. It identified itself as an archivist craft representing no empire, bound by no military charter, carrying only observers and historians authorized to record pivotal moments in galactic evolution. Its request was simple, delivered with deliberate humility, permission to approach the boundary, not to cross it, but to witness it, to confirm that what the galaxy believed was real, and to understand why it had been built. For a long moment, Earth did not respond. The silence carried weight, not menace, as humanity evaluated more than the request itself. They considered precedent, interpretation, and consequence. Granting access could inspire trust or invite imitation. Denial could preserve security or harden misunderstanding. This was not a tactical decision. It was a philosophical one. The response, when it came, was carefully measured. Earth acknowledged the request and granted conditional proximity, specifying a distance that would allow observation without interaction. The boundary would remain untouched. The rules would not bend. Understanding, if it was to be earned, would come from respect, not exception. The archivist vessel complied immediately, halting exactly where instructed, its compliance reinforcing the difference between curiosity and challenge. What followed was not dramatic, but it was profound. Over extended observation, the archivist recorded subtle distortions in spacetime, fluctuations that suggested the boundary was not a static barrier, but an active equilibrium, constantly adjusting to maintain its condition. There were no visible weapons, no towers of energy, no focal points to target. The power lay in integration, not concentration. A system so distributed that disabling it would require dismantling the laws it operated within. As data accumulated, something shifted among the observers. This was not the work of a species obsessed with defense or dominance. It was the expression of a civilization that had internalized its own capacity for destruction and chosen to externalize its restraint instead. The boundary was not built to keep others out. It was built to keep humanity from having to decide, again and again, how much violence was justified. The archivists transmitted their findings across the galaxy in near real time, not as propaganda, but as raw observation. The effect was immediate. Narratives softened, accusations lost momentum. The idea that Earth's warning had been an overreaction finally collapsed under the weight of evidence. Humanity had not overprepared. It had prepared responsibly. When the observation period ended, the archivist vessel requested nothing further. It did not ask for entry. It did not seek dialogue. It simply thanked Earth for the opportunity to witness restraint made manifest, then powered its engines and withdrew, carrying with it a story far more influential than any show of force. As the vessel disappeared into the dark, Earth's systems remained unchanged, the boundary intact, the silence restored. But the galaxy was no longer the same. The test had come, not as an attack, but as a question. And humanity's answer had been consistent with everything it had claimed to be. Yet even in that quiet affirmation, a deeper truth settled in. Understanding could spread, respect could grow, but certainty had a way of breeding complacency. And the universe had a habit of challenging even the most carefully maintained balance. One final moment remained, a moment that would decide whether Earth's warning would stand not just as law, but as legacy. The final moment did not arrive with engines or armadas or the cold geometry of war. It arrived quietly, carried on a wave of realization that spread across the galaxy long after the echoes of destruction had faded. Civilizations reviewed the records again and again, not searching for weakness, but for meaning. They replayed Earth's words, examined its restraint, and finally understood that the warning had never been about protecting a single world or even a single species. It had been about protecting the future itself from the oldest failure of intelligent life, the belief that power exists to be tested. In councils that once measured worth by fleet size and territorial reach, a shift occurred. Policies were rewritten. Expansion doctrines were abandoned. Boundaries were defined not by how far one could reach, but by how responsibly one could stop. Earth's linear-owned soul became more than a physical limit. It became a reference point, a symbol invoked whenever ambition threatened to outrun wisdom. The galaxy began to learn, slowly and unevenly, that survival on a shared stage required more than strength. It required restraint strong enough to endure temptation. Humanity, for its part, did not step forward as leaders or judges. It remained where it had always been, orbiting an ordinary star, living with the same contradictions and struggles that had defined it since before the stars were within reach. The difference was awareness. Humans knew now that every decision they made would be watched, interpreted, and remembered. That knowledge tempered them, not with fear, but with humility rooted in hard-earned experience. The boundary endured, silent and absolute, not because it was enforced daily, but because it no longer needed to be. No ships approached it without permission, no weapons tested its limits. The galaxy had accepted that Earth's final warning was not an invitation to conflict, but an offer of clarity. Respect this line, and coexistence remains possible. Cross it, and consequences are immediate, impartial, and final. In time, historians would mark this era not as the rise of human dominance, but as the moment the galaxy matured, a moment when a young species, forged in conflict and near extinction, chose to break the cycle rather than perpetuate it. Humanity did not claim moral superiority. It simply acted on a lesson learned too painfully to ignore. And in the quiet between stars, as generations passed and the fear receded into memory, one truth remained unchallenged. Earth had not saved the galaxy by destroying its enemies. It had saved it by drawing a line and having the strength to stop their. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human.